In more than 2 decades, Luka Modric has lived like a person carrying two lives in the same body, one life that the world praises, and one life that no one truly sees. On the field, he is the embodiment of calmness, a conductor who never panics, a person who seems to know no fear. But deep inside, there is still a boy who grew up in the middle of war, where death came too close and safety was never something obvious. There are memories that never disappear, only learn how to stay silent. There are pains that are never spoken, only hidden in every run. Luka is not a person who does not feel pressure. He is just someone who learned to endure it from when he was too young. When others see a small but resilient player, they do not know that resilience was not built in the training room but was formed from the days when surviving was already a victory. He does not play just to win. He plays so he does not have to return to the places where memories are still intact. And that very thing has made him a person who never collapses, because he has once stood in a place where collapsing was not an option. But that very quiet person wrote one of the greatest journeys in modern football history. With Real Madrid, Luka Modric won 5 UEFA Champions League titles, 3 La Liga titles, 2 Copa del Rey titles, and a series of other international honors, becoming a pillar in the Royal Club's brilliant era of success. He was the heart of the midfield, the one who controlled the rhythm in the biggest matches, where pressure could crush anyone. In 2018, he led Croatia to the World Cup final and won the World Cup Golden Ball as recognition for an extraordinary journey. Also that year, he won the Ballon d'Or, breaking the more than a decade-long dominance of Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, while also receiving the Best FIFA Award and UEFA Best Player in Europe. Those titles were not just achievements, but proof of an unbreakable will. A person who had gone through everything to stand at the highest place, not because he had no past, but because he had never let the past defeat him. Before continuing with the story, please hit like and leave a heart as appreciation for the man who has quietly carried a heavy past without ever collapsing. And if you want to understand what created that will, please subscribe to the channel to go deeper into the years when Luka Modric was forced to learn how to survive before learning how to win. Luka Modric's childhood did not begin with dreams, but with fear. In Zadar, in the early 1990s, when war crept into every street and every house, the boy Luka did not first learn how to play, but learned how to listen to sounds that could decide life or death. The sound of gunfire far or near, the sound of doors slamming quickly at night, the sound of adults talking and the tension they tried to hide, all became signals that a child was forced to understand even before growing up. In that world, fear was not a passing emotion, but a constant state, like a shadow that never left. And then the first shock of life came in a way no child could prepare for. Luka's grandfather, the man who had once taken him through the fields, the man who brought him rare moments of peace, was killed in the war. There was no goodbye, no chance to understand, only a sudden void opening in his young soul. That was not just a loss, but the breaking of the small world he once knew. From that moment, Luka was no longer an ordinary child. He had seen what many people never have to witness in their lifetime, and that memory never left him. His family could not stop to grieve because war did not allow anyone to stop. They were forced to leave their homeland, leave what had once been home, carrying only what they could hold in their hands, and the memories they could not leave behind. They became people fleeing on their own land, living in temporary places where there was no stability, no sense of belonging. The cramped rooms in refugee hotels became the new roof, where many families crowded together, where every passing day was a tiring wait with no known end. The long nights passed in heavy silence, broken by sounds from afar, reminding that danger had never truly disappeared. Luka grew up in nights like that, where sleep was never deep, where every small sound could make him wake up startled. He had no proper childhood, no carefree days, no plans for the future. While other children dreamed of what they would become, Luka learned to live day by day, learned not to ask too many questions that no one could answer. In that world, weakness was a luxury no one could afford. Adults had to be strong to protect the family, and children also learned to stay silent so as not to add to the burden. Luka was not taught to become a strong person. He was forced to become one. And it was in that situation that a different kind of strength formed. Not loud, not showy, but quiet and persistent. Football came to him not like a dream nurtured from childhood, but like the only shelter on empty patches of land, in parking lots, between walls still bearing traces of war. Luka played ball, as if it was the only way to forget everything around him, even if only for a moment. The ball became the only thing that could be controlled in a world where everything was uncertain. When he touched the ball, when he moved, when he focused on his own small match, the other sounds seemed to retreat. But war did not disappear. It just waited there, waiting until the ball game ended when he returned to reality. And over time, Luka learned something no child should have to learn. That life could change in just one moment. That nothing was certain, and that the people he loved could disappear without explanation. Those memories did not grow with him but stayed intact, like scars that never healed. They did not appear clearly every day, but were always there. In the way he thought, in the way he reacted, in the silence that others might mistake for calmness. Luka Modric grew up without a sense of safety, without the belief that everything would be okay, and perhaps that is exactly why, throughout the rest of his life, he never allowed himself to stop. Not because he was not tired, but because stopping meant having to face everything he had tried to overcome. And from a boy who only tried to survive day by day, a different person gradually formed, one who could stand firm under pressure that others could not endure, one who was not easily broken, because he had once lived in a world where everything could shatter at any time. The days after that brought no relief, only a different form of existence, longer and more tiring. In the cramped refugee hotels near Zadar, where each small room was shared by many families, Luka Modric grew up amid instability, with no end in sight. There was no concept of a proper home, no private corner to call his own, only thin walls, long hallways, and the sounds of crowded lives' footsteps, whispers, suppressed worries. Each day passed so similarly it was hard to distinguish. But inside, everything was always tense, always as if waiting for something worse to happen. His parents had no time to show weakness, because they had to carry the whole family in exhausted circumstances, had to find ways to keep everything from collapsing. Their eyes, their quiet sighs, their short nighttime conversations all carried a fatigue that a child could feel even without fully understanding. Lucas saw that every day, and in a natural way he learned not to bother, learned to manage on his own, learned to grow up without the protection a child was supposed to have. No one taught him to be strong, but circumstances forced him to be. No one was always there to explain what was right or wrong. No clear guidance about the future, because the adults themselves did not know what tomorrow would bring. In that world, children grew up faster, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Luka had no childhood to remember in the normal way, no long carefree afternoons playing, no plans for the years ahead. He only had the present, and that present was always fragile, always able to change at any time. It was in that gap that football appeared as the only thing he could hold on to, not like a distant dream, but like a habit, a reflex, a way to keep his mind from being swept into the fear around him. On parking lots where the ground was hard and uneven, where old cars were parked close together, where there were no lines or proper goals, Luka and the other children played ball as if it was the only thing that made them still feel like children. There was no coach, no tactics, no one to guide, only instinct and repetition. The ball rolled over cracks in the pavement, hit walls, bounced back, and he learned to control it under conditions many people would never imagine. But even when the ball rolled, danger was always present. There were moments when explosions sounded from afar. close enough to make everyone stop for a few seconds, look at each other, then continue as if nothing had happened, not because they were not afraid, but because they had gotten used to not being able to stop every time fear appeared. Luka grew up in matches like that, matches with no spectators, no prizes, no recognition, only a short time when he could forget where he was living. Gradually, football was not just a game, but became part of the way he existed. When he ran, when he touched the ball, when he focused on every small movement, everything around seemed to retreat. Those were rare moments when he could control something in a world where everything else was out of reach. No one told him this could be the path to the future. No one promised he would become a professional player. Football was not a dream, it was a shelter. And in a world like that, just having one shelter was already enough. His parents continued to try, continued to do everything in their power to keep the family standing, but the gap between what they wanted for their children and what they could do became clearer. Luka saw that, and in his own way he understood that he could not wait for something to change from the outside. No miracle would happen, no one would come to take him out of that situation. If there was a path, he would have to find it himself. And football, even though it began as a way to forget reality, gradually became the only thing that seemed to open another possibility. But even when that possibility appeared, it was still very vague, very distant. A boy from a refugee hotel, playing ball in a parking lot, with no foundation, no patronage, no conditions, was not the model anyone would bet on for the future. No one said it directly, but everything around clearly reflected it. Luka had none of the advantages many others had, and perhaps that is why he did not learn to expect. He did not dream of big stadiums, did not imagine titles, did not think about becoming a name the world would know. He just kept playing ball, kept repeating the movements he had taught himself, kept seeking those short moments when he could forget everything happening around him. Time passed and war gradually receded, but what it left behind did not disappear. Children who grew up in that situation could not return to the initial state because they had never had a normal starting point. Luka carried those memories, not like a burden always clearly present, but as part of the way he saw the world. He did not easily trust stability, did not easily believe that everything would happen the way he wanted. But that very thing created a different kind of strength of focus, a determination, an ability to keep moving forward even when there was no guarantee. In those parking lots, between old walls and sounds of a time not yet completely over, something had been formed. Not a legend, not a grand dream, but a habit of not stopping. Luka Modric did not know where his small runs would lead, but he had learned how to keep running even when there was no clear destination. And perhaps it was in that continuation that his path began to be drawn, not by what he was promised, but by what he had been forced to go through. When war gradually moved away and real football fields began to appear before his eyes, the path Luka Modric stepped onto was not like a dream opening up, but like a narrow door that could close at any time. The early years in the professional football environment did not bring recognition but brought skeptical looks. In a world where physique, strength, and speed were seen as the first standards, Luka became out of place. He was smaller, thinner, and looked more fragile than the other players. Training sessions were not places to shine, but places to prove he was not as weak as he appeared. But that was not easy, because every time he stepped onto the field, even before touching the ball, people already had a conclusion ready. No one said outright that he was not good enough, but the way they looked, the way they arranged the lineup, the way they gave opportunities said it all. Luka was not the first choice, not the name mentioned when difference was needed. He was only an option, a name that could be replaced, a person who had to work twice as hard just to stand on the same level as others. In training sessions, when other players used strength to dominate, Luka was forced to find another way to survive. He did not always succeed, There were days he was pushed down easily, overtaken, left behind. And each time like that, doubt grew bigger. Not only from others, but from inside himself. Comparisons appeared frequently, whether spoken or not. Taller, stronger, faster players. They were the models modern football honored. Luka was not like them. He could not change his body, could not turn himself into another version just to fit expectations. The only thing he could do was continue, even knowing that every step was placed under doubt. In those moments he had no one to lean on. There was no special protection, no one to stand up and affirm his value in front of everyone. He had to do it himself, little by little, in silence. There were training sessions that ended with no one remembering what he had done. Matches where he only came on in the final minutes when everything was almost decided. There was no chance to shine, no moment to change the way others saw him. And it was in those periods that the feeling of being overlooked became clearer than ever. But Luka did not react, did not complain, did not try to attract attention. He only continued doing what he had learned since he was small, stay silent and survive. That silence was not a sign of acceptance, but another form of persistence. While others might show disappointment, Luka kept everything inside. Memories from the past taught him that there were battles that could not be won with words, but only overcome with actions. So he began to change the way he played, not to impress, but to adapt. When he could not win with strength, he learned to read the game. When he could not get past with speed, he learned to move before the opponent could react. Those things did not come immediately, but were the result of hours of training, of observing, of accepting that he had to do more than others to reach the same position. But even when those changes began to work, recognition still came very slowly. There were moments he played well, but not enough to completely change everyone's view. Luka was still there, still the one who had to prove himself every day, as if everything could be erased after just one mistake. There was no guarantee, no sense of safety, and perhaps that very thing made him never allow himself to stop. In a world where many players were built from confidence and early affirmation, Luka was formed from doubt and lack of recognition. He did not grow up with the belief that he would become a star, but with the awareness that he could be eliminated at any time. That did not make him weaker, but created a different approach. Every training session, every match was not an opportunity to show off, but a test that had to be passed. And when you live in that state for too long, it is no longer pressure, but becomes instinct. There are people who need encouragement to move forward. Luka did not. He had gotten used to not being chosen, used to having to wait, used to having to create opportunities in the smallest spaces. And gradually, in that persistence, something began to change. Not an explosion, not a moment that made everyone pay attention, but a presence that became clearer. Passes became more accurate, decisions more correct, plays that previously no one expected from a player like him. But even when that happened, Luka still did not change the way he approached things. He did not become louder, did not try to assert himself with words. He still kept the silence, still continued working, as if nothing was ever enough, and perhaps, in some way, he believed it would never be enough. Not because he lacked ability, but because he had gotten used to always having to prove himself. And when you live in that state long enough, it becomes part of who you are. The football world does not wait for anyone, and Luka understood that better than anyone. He had no initial advantage, no guarantee from fame or physique. The only thing he had was the ability to continue even when everything around did not support him. And it was in the years when he was seen as too weak for this world that a foundation was built. Not a foundation of standing out, but a foundation of endurance. Something that later, when everything changed, when the lights began to shine, would still be there, unchanged, like a core part no one could see but that decided everything. Then the time came when that path took Luka Modric away from the little he had gotten used to, not to step into the light, but to go deeper into places almost no one noticed. Loan contracts did not come with great expectations, but were just a way for a young player not to get stuck. A way to continue existing in the football system. He was sent to lesser-known teams, places without glamour, without stands full of fans, without media lights shining on every run. Those were football fields where people came more out of habit than passion, where matches took place with no one thinking anything special would happen. The playing conditions there were not like what people usually imagine about professional football. The pitches were not flat. The grass was uneven, with spots where hard ground showed underneath. Every time the ball bounced, it was unpredictable, and every touch required more than focus. Harsh weather, cold, rainy days, evenings when wind blew through thin layers of clothing, all created an environment where just standing firm was already a challenge. There were no enthusiastic crowds, only a few scattered claps, sometimes uncomfortable boos. There were no praising articles, no detailed tactical analyses. What Luka did on the field almost disappeared right after the match ended, as if it had never happened. In that environment, no one cared who you were, what potential you had, what you could become in the future. The only thing that mattered was whether you could contribute right now. If not, you would be replaced, forgotten, swept away like so many other names. Luka stepped into those matches not as a protected talent, but as someone who had to find his place among a group that had no time to wait. Pressure did not come from great expectations, but from instability, from not knowing if he would still play tomorrow, from the fact that every mistake could make the next opportunity disappear. There were matches played in front of almost empty stands, where the players' voices rang out clearer than any cheering. There were long trips to distant fields where facilities were just enough for the match to take place. Luka was there, amid all of that. Not like a star being polished, but like a person trying not to sink. No one stood outside watching him with expectant eyes. No one was ready to say he just needed time. If he did not prove his own value himself, no one would do it for him. The feeling of being forgotten did not come suddenly, but crept in gradually over time. Every match that passed without recognition, every training day without encouragement, all accumulated into a long silence. Luka had already gotten used to not being noticed before, but here it became clearer than ever. He not only did not stand out, but almost did not exist in the thoughts of those outside. But instead of letting that pull him down, he continued doing the only thing he knew: keep playing, keep moving, keep holding the ball at his feet a little longer, a little more accurately. In those matches, amid imperfect conditions, something began to form more clearly. Not an explosion, but a quiet stability. Luka began to read the game better, began to understand when to hold the ball, when to pass, when to move to create space that no one had seen before. Those things did not make him the center of attention immediately, but gradually they created a difference that those who played with him could feel. Not everyone noticed, but the people closest began to see that there was something different about him. Even so, the surrounding environment did not change. The fields remained the same, the stands still sparse, the attention still almost non-existent. Luka still stepped onto the field as a name few remembered, still left the field with no guarantee that the next time would be better. But inside, something had changed. Not explosive confidence, but a clearer understanding of himself. He did not need immediate recognition to continue, because he had gotten used to not having it. There are paths built under the light, where every step is followed and evaluated. And there are paths built in the dark, where no one sees, where everything happens slower, harder, but also more enduring. Luka was walking the second path. No one told him where it would lead, no one guaranteed it would end well. But he still continued, because that was the only way he knew to move forward. And in the years when almost no one cared, no one followed, an important foundation had been laid, a foundation that did not depend on attention, was not affected by recognition, but only relied on unchanging persistence. In a world that paid no attention, Luka Modric learned how to exist without needing to be seen. And perhaps it was in that silence that he prepared for something that at this moment even he himself could not yet imagine. That one day the world would not be able to look away from him, but when that happened, he would still keep the way he had learned from the places no one cared about. Continue, stay silent, and never stop. After that summer, when everything seemed to have reached its highest point, Luka Modric stepped into a moment that many players only dare to dream about throughout their entire careers. The moment when he was named the best player in the world. In 2018, he won the Ballon d'Or, the most prestigious individual honor that football can award. In a decade when names like Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo had almost monopolized all the glory, Luka's victory was not just recognition, but also a breakthrough. It marked the first time in many years that another player stepped up to the highest position, a person who did not belong to the familiar molds of fame and attention. The world looked at him with surprise, then turned to admiration. Stories were retold, journeys were analyzed, words of praise appeared from everywhere. Luka Modric, from a name that had once been doubted, now became a symbol of persistence, of a different path. Stadiums, television programs, newspaper articles, all talked about him, but amid all that noise, Luka still kept his own silence. The moment he stepped onto the stage to receive the award did not come with the emotional explosion many people expected. There were no tears, no overly excited gestures, no long speeches. He stood there, accepting the award with an almost unchanged calmness, as if it was just the next part of the journey, not the final destination. Many people looked and saw composure, but inside, that feeling was much more complex. There are victories that bring relief, moments that make a person feel complete. But for Luka, that title did not erase what had existed before. It did not make the memories disappear, did not lighten what he had carried for many years. It simply stood there as proof of what he had done, but did not change who he was. And perhaps that is why his reaction was not like what people usually see. He did not need that title to know his own value. The years before had taught him that recognition did not always come, and when it did not change the nature of what had happened. Luka did not become a different person after winning the Ballon d'Or. He was still the one who had gone through the parking lots, still the one who had once been doubted, still the one who had learned to exist in silence. The quietness in that peak moment was not a lack of emotion, but a different form of control. He did not let himself be swept into what was around him, did not let the attention change the way he saw everything. While the world saw this as the peak, Luka perhaps saw it as a point on the road, an important point, but not everything. After the ceremony, when the lights went out, when the applause gradually died down, Luka returned to what he had always done. There was no big change, no clear turning point in the way he approached football or life. He continued training, continued playing, continued keeping his distance from the noise outside. Titles could change the way others looked at him, but they did not change the way he looked at himself. What surprised many people was not that he won the title, but the way he received it. In a world where success often came with display, Luka chose to keep everything minimal. He did not use that moment to build an image, did not turn it into a bigger story. He let it pass, the way he had let many other things pass in his life. And perhaps that was exactly what made that moment different. Not because it was loud, but because it was quiet. Not because it changed everything, but because it did not change what was most important. Luka Modric stood at the peak of world football, but still kept the person he had become long before that. In the eyes of the world, that was a moment of victory. But in his own silence, it was only a part of a journey that had not ended. And even after achieving what many saw as the peak, Luka still continued, not because he needed more titles, but because he did not know any other way to live except to keep moving forward. After all the moments the world saw, after the titles, the glorious nights and the non-stop cheers, Luka Modric always returned to a place where he never let the stage lights touch. That was his private life, where there existed a part of the person he carefully preserved, almost completely separated from everything outside. There, with Vanja Bosnic, he was not a symbol, not the best player in the world, but only a husband, a father, an ordinary person in very small moments that no one saw. The meeting between Luka and Vanja did not carry noisy or romantic colors in the way the media usually exploited. It happened naturally, in simplicity, just like the person he was. But over time, that relationship became an inseparable part of his life. A support he never talked much about but was always present. They got married in privacy, without show, without turning it into a big event. And from then on, they built a life where stability was not something obvious, but something preserved every day. While the football world was always moving, always changing, always demanding, Luka chose to keep his family at a safe distance. He did not let the pressures from the field spill into his private space, did not let failures or victories define the way he existed outside the match. When he left the field, he left behind the role the world assigned to him and stepped into another role, where he did not need to prove anything, did not need to maintain any image. The moments with family were not recorded, did not appear in newspapers, did not become stories to be told. They were simple meals, conversations without cameras, days when he was just part of a family like any other family. Luka spent time with his children in a way he had never had when he was small, not in worry, not in instability, but in an environment he tried to keep as peaceful as possible. Perhaps that was his way of making up for what he had lacked, not with words, but with presence. The reticence in his personal life was not a strategy, but an instinct. Luka was not comfortable sharing too much, did not find meaning in letting others look into every detail of his life. He stayed away from showy activities, unnecessary events, places where attention became the main goal. Not because he could not, but because he did not need to do that. What was important to him lay elsewhere, in things that could not be measured by fame or public interest. In a world where many people traded privacy for presence, Luka did the opposite. He protected his space like something precious, like the only place where he could truly be himself without needing to hold any role. Vanja was there not as part of the public image but as a true companion, someone who understood him in a way no one else could. They did not need to prove that to anyone because what they had was not built on external recognition. There were pressures Luka could not avoid. Pressures from his career, from expectations, from always having to maintain the highest level of form. But in that private space he created a clear boundary, a place where he could put all of that down, at least for a short time. Not to forget, but to keep himself from being completely swept into it. And perhaps that very boundary helped him continue, helped him return to the field without losing himself. Family was not a place he sought escape, but a place where he found balance. In the moments when everything outside became too heavy, it was the only place that did not require him to become something else. There was no comparison, no evaluation, no numbers or titles, only presence, peace, and the things he could keep for himself. Luka Modric had spent his whole life controlling what happened on the field, adapting to pressures few could fully understand. But in his private life, he chose not to control everything in the same way. He did not try to turn it into a perfect story, did not try to make it stand out. He just kept it there as an irreplaceable part, as a place he could return to after everything, and perhaps in a journey where most of the time he had to carry the past, face pressure, continue even when tired. Having such a space was not just a choice, but a necessity. A place no one saw but that kept him from breaking. A place he never talked much about but always protected. the way he had protected himself throughout his life. But even when he had created a private space quiet enough to breathe, the things belonging to Luka Modric's past had never truly left. They did not appear clearly every day, were not always present in every thought, but they were there, silent, persistent, like an inseparable part of the person he was. Memories of war did not disappear with time. They only changed the way they existed. No longer vivid images as before, but deep enough to influence the way he saw the world, the way he reacted, the way he kept himself in moments when others could easily lose control. There were sounds, moments, feelings that even a small thing could bring back. He did not always think about them, but they were always there, in the background of everything. And perhaps that was why Luka never truly let himself completely relax. His emotional control was not a skill trained in football, but something formed long before, from the years when staying calm was not a choice but something necessary to continue existing. While the past existed in its own way, the present also brought other pressures, no less heavy. When his career reached its peak, the attention came not only from the outside world, but also from his own homeland. In Croatia, Luka was not just a player, but a symbol. And when a person becomes a symbol, every action, every decision is scrutinized in a different way. Not all of it was support. There were times when he became the center of debates, criticisms that were not directly related to what he did on the field. Legal issues, questions about his relationship with powerful figures in Croatian football, court sessions, testimonies all created another layer of pressure he had to face. It was not something that could be solved with an accurate pass or a good match. It lay outside the field, outside what he could control with his professional ability. And in those moments his image was no longer simple as before. He was not only a player, but became part of more complex stories, where the line between right and wrong was not always clear in the eyes of the public. The media at home was not always gentle. Criticisms appeared, doubts were raised, and expectations turned into pressure. Luka stood in the middle of it all, not like someone who could easily escape, but like someone forced to go through it. But the way he faced that still did not change. He did not step out to argue, did not try to explain everything to the public, did not try to defend himself with words. He kept silent, the way he had always done when facing things beyond his control. That silence was not always understood. Some people saw it as avoidance, some saw it as a sign of something unspoken. But for Luka, it was the only way he knew to continue without being swept into whirlpools he could not control. He did not try to change the way others perceived him, did not seek agreement from everyone. He only held his position firmly, not with words, but by continuing to do what he had done throughout his life: play football. On the field, those pressures did not disappear, but were set aside. Luka stepped into matches with the same focus, the same control he had built over many years. There was no sign of wavering, no display of being affected by what was happening outside. But that did not mean he did not feel it. It only meant he had learned to keep it at a distance far enough not to interrupt what he needed to do. The matches continued, and Luka was still there, moving, passing the ball, regulating the rhythm, as if nothing around had changed. But inside, there might be a different story, a tension kept hidden, a pressure not spoken, a fatigue not shown clearly. And it was in that state that he continued, not because everything had become easier, but because he had gotten used to continuing even when things were not easy. There are people defined by what they show on the outside, and there are people defined by what they carry inside. Luka Modric belonged to the second group. The memories, the pressures, the controversies all existed, did not disappear, were not completely resolved. But they did not stop him from continuing, not because they were not important, but because he had learned to exist with them. And perhaps that was exactly what made the difference. Not that he overcame everything, but that he carried everything and still continued. Not that everything became lighter, but that he became solid enough not to be slowed down by them. In a journey where past and present always intertwined, Luka did not choose to separate them, but kept them existing together in a quiet way but undeniable. And then, when the pressures from the past and present were still there, another challenge gradually appeared, silent but unavoidable: time. For Luka Modric, the body no longer responded as before. The runs were no longer as light as in the peak years. The accelerations required more effort, and consecutive matches left clearer traces on every muscle. Age did not come suddenly, but crept in little by little in small details that only he could feel most clearly. But unlike many others, Luka did not face that with public anxiety. He did not talk about it much, did not turn it into a story to explain. He just continued as if time was another opponent he had to learn to adapt to. In a lineup where younger, faster players kept appearing, maintaining his position was not guaranteed. At Real Madrid, where competition never stopped, every season was a new test. Luka was no longer the young player who needed to prove he could exist, but a person who had to prove he still had value in a world changing quickly. And he did that in the familiar way, not with words, but with what he showed on the field. He adjusted the way he played, no longer relying too much on physical condition, but on his understanding of the game. Movements became more precise, decisions faster, touches more effective. He did not run more, but ran at better times. He did not challenge stronger, but chose better moments. That was not decline, but a form of evolution, a way to keep staying without having to fight what could not be changed. Behind what happened on the field was a discipline few saw. Training sessions were not just obligations, but the way he kept his body and mind at a level where he could continue. Diet, rest time, recovery after every match, all were tightly controlled, not because he wanted to extend his career at any cost, but because he understood that if he wanted to continue, he could not do it randomly. Every small detail mattered, and he did not overlook anything. There were days when the body did not respond as wanted, training sessions where fatigue was clearer than usual. But Luka did not stop there. He did not look for reasons, did not allow himself to slow down just because of that feeling, not because he did not feel the limits, but because he chose to go close to those limits, not crossing them, but also not stepping back. While many players began to think about the end when entering this stage of their careers, Luka showed no sign that he wanted to stop. There were no statements about retirement, no signs of preparation for a new chapter. He was still there in every match, in every training session, as if everything was not yet finished, not because he needed more titles, but because continuing had become part of who he was. For many people, the final stage of a career is time to look back, to reduce the load, to accept that everything is gradually closing. But for Luka, it was like the next part of the journey, no longer about proving he could reach the peak, but about proving he could stay there longer than others thought. And that did not come from stubbornness, but from a clear understanding that he could still contribute, could still create influence, even in a different way than before. He continued to play, continued to keep the rhythm, continued to be part of the system he had helped build. He was not always the one who played the most, not always at the center of everything, but his presence still had value. Younger teammates looked at him and saw not just a player, but a standard, a way of approaching, a discipline, an attitude that was not easy to maintain throughout a long career. And perhaps it was in this stage that the meaning of continuing became clearer than ever. No longer about proving anything to the world, no longer about breaking doubts, but about holding firmly to what had been built. Luka Modric did not run to catch up with time, but ran with it, adjusting, adapting, but never stopping. In a journey that began from places no one noticed, went through doubts, pressures, peaks, and also controversies, still being here, still playing, still contributing, was not something obvious. It was the result of a long process, of choices repeated every day, of a person who never allowed himself to leave the path he had chosen. And as time continued to pass, Luka was still there, not to fight it, but to continue going with it, step by step, the way he had always done. And then when looking back at the entire journey, Luka Modric does not appear as a simple victory story, but as a straight line stretching through many layers of life, each layer carrying a part that the world only saw half of. From the boy who grew up in the middle of war in Zadar, where fear came before dreams, to the man standing in the middle of the biggest stadiums in the world, everything seemed to have changed completely. But if looking deeper, there was one thing that had never changed: the way he continued to walk, no matter what the circumstances were. Throughout his career, Luka had lived with two parallel lives, one life that the whole world saw, and one life that he carried in silence. On the field, he was a symbol of calmness, of tactical intelligence, of a person who controlled the rhythm of the match with almost absolute precision. The titles, the big matches, the remembered moments, all created an image that anyone could recognize. But behind that was a different person, a person who had never truly left his past, a person who had learned to live with memories that not everyone could understand. The achievements Luka reached did not come from a straight path. They were built on years of being doubted, being undervalued, being placed on the sidelines of important choices. From the fields where no one cared, to the first days at Tottenham Hotspur where he was seen but not yet understood, then to Real Madrid where he faced pressure at the highest level. Every step was uncertain, and even when he had stood at the peak, with titles like the Ballon d'Or, Champions League, or the journey that took Croatia to the World Cup final, the pressures did not disappear. They only changed shape from doubt to expectation, from having to prove to having to maintain. The losses also never left. Not only memories of war, of what happened when he was too small to understand, but also pressures from his own homeland. Controversies he could not fully control, moments when his image was placed into difficult questions. Luka did not explain much, did not try to fix everything with words. He continued in the way he had always done, silent and moving forward, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had chosen to let his actions become the only answer. At an age when many had already stopped, Luka still continued, not with haste, not with effort against time, but with a clearer understanding of himself. He no longer needed to prove who he was, but he still played, still trained, still maintained the standards he had set long ago. There was no sign of letting go, no fatigue shown on the outside, only a steady continuation, like a habit that had sunk deep into who he was. And perhaps that was exactly what defined Luka Modric more than any title. Not the number of times he lifted trophies, not the individual awards, but the way he existed through all of that. A person not defined by what he achieved, but by the way he overcame what he had to face. A person who did not need to change his nature to adapt to the world, but found ways to hold that nature firm in every circumstance. The legacy Luka left did not lie in the numbers, even though they were enough to place him among the greatest players. It lay in the way he proved that there was another path, a path that was not loud, not showy, did not need to be at the center to create influence. A path where persistence, determination, and the ability to continue were more important than any explosive moment. When the final matches of his career gradually approached, when time no longer stood on his side as before, Luka was still there. Not like a symbol closing, but like a person still living in his journey. He did not run to finish, but ran because that was the only way he knew to exist. And perhaps even when he stops one day, what people remember is not only what he did, but the way he did it, quietly, persistently, and never stopping. The story of Luka Modric is not a simple victory journey, but a deep cut about the price of persistence in a world that always demands more than what a person can endure. When looking back at the details that have been told from childhood in the middle of war in Sadar, the shock of losing his grandfather, the years living in cramped refugee hotels, to the days when he was seen as too weak and criticized by the media at Real Madrid, people cannot help but feel a lingering ache. That is the pain of a person who never really had a peaceful starting point, but was still forced to keep walking as if everything was fine. Even when he stood at the peak with the Ballon d'Or in 2018, his almost empty calm reaction showed a different truth. There are glories that are not enough to heal what had existed for a very long time. That very thing makes Luka's image both pitiable and admirable, a person carrying heavy memories, but not letting them destroy him. For audiences in the United States, where culture values individual success and self-expression, this story brings a profound lesson. Not everyone who wins is happy, and not all strength is loud. From Luka's silence in the face of criticism, maintaining discipline in his later years, to protecting his private family life discreetly, we see that true value lies in the ability to control oneself and continue moving forward even when no one sees. In a society full of pressure and competition, his story reminds us that sometimes the strongest thing is not winning against the world, but not collapsing in front of what one has experienced. If the story of Luka Modric has touched you, please hit subscribe and leave a heart as appreciation for a person who has quietly overcome everything without needing to be understood. Thank you for listening, and see you again in the next video, where stories behind the spotlight will continue to be told.